In December 1900, a ship arrived off the coast of the Flannan Isles in Scotland. It was supposed to be a routine visit, just delivering supplies and relieving the lighthouse keepers that had been there for 3 weeks. But when the ship's crew arrived, they found the lighthouse completely abandoned. The 3 men had vanished without a trace. No signs of a struggle, no bodies, just a single untouched meal and an overturned chair. For over a century, we have been asking ourselves, what happened to the keepers of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse? Was it the sea, or madness, or was it something beyond human understanding? Tonight, we unravel one of history's most chilling maritime mysteries. The Flannan Isles are a small and uninhabited group of islands off the west coast of Scotland known as the Outer Hebrides. The only permanent residents there are a flock of sheep, a few seagulls, and the only draw to the island is a chapel built in the 7th century by St. Flannan. Remote, windswept, and treacherous, these islands have long been feared by sailors. Even before the lighthouse was built in 1899, locals spoke of strange occurrences, ghostly figures walking along the cliffs, and whispers carried by the wind. Some even believed that the islands were cursed. The lighthouse, which was designed to keep ships safe as they passed the rocky coastline, it required 3 men to maintain it. So these keepers would rotate shifts. They would spend weeks in isolation before being relieved by fresh crew, at which point they could return to their families and the mainland. But in December of 1900, something went terribly wrong. James Ducat was the principal keeper of the lighthouse. Now, this guy had been a lighthouse keeper for 22 years, right? He knew what he was doing. He was very experienced. He had actually been an assistant keeper for a very long time, and he had just recently got the promotion that he'd been waiting for his whole career. Principal lighthouse keeper. And this was also a brand new lighthouse. It was built just a year earlier. So this guy's living the dream. He's got his dream promotion. It's in a brand new, beautiful lighthouse on the outer coast of Scotland. His wife and kids would have been so proud of him. And just generally, he was seen as a very responsible, level-headed guy. And he took his job seriously. He had a family to take care of. He had 4 kids. So he wouldn't have done anything erratic. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant keeper. And he was in his late 20s to early 30s. He had worked on another lighthouse previously, but he had been fined 5 shillings because some of his equipment had been swept away in a storm, and he was made to take responsibility for it. Now, 5 shillings might not sound like a lot today. It would literally buy you nothing. But back then, 5 shillings would buy you enough coal to heat your house for an entire week. And this was the middle of winter in Scotland. He did not want to make the same mistake again. And this cautiousness might explain some of his actions during this fateful afternoon. Donald MacArthur was the 3rd and final keeper who was present at the lighthouse when they all went missing. He was like a temp worker. He was filling in for someone else who was sick. And not much is known about him except that there were rumors that Donald was a bit of a scrapper. He'd got into fights on the mainland and had a bit of a reputation for being a hot-headed man. On December 26th, the relief ship Hesperus finally reached the Flannan Isles. They were already overdue. Bad weather had delayed them by about a week, but as they approached, something felt off. The ship's captain, James Harvey, fired a flare, but there was just silence. So one of the relief keepers who was coming in to replace the crew, his name was Joseph Moore, and he decided to go on shore. Joseph climbed the rocky steps, battered by wind and rain, and when he reached the lighthouse door, he found it was locked from the outside. Inside, everything seemed normal. The kitchen table was set, plates of food untouched, and a single chair had been knocked over, and the clock on the wall had stopped. Then Joseph checked the sleeping quarters. The beds were empty and unmade, which is a very strange thing to do. These keepers were very disciplined men. It was like the military. They got up in the morning, they made their beds, and got on with their days. The oil lamps were full but unlit, and most chillingly, the keepers' waterproof coats were missing, except for one. There was a pet canary at the lighthouse, kind of like an office dog. It's unclear if this bird belonged to one of the keepers or if it just belonged to the lighthouse as a sort of stress relief for the keepers' weeks in isolation. The canary was found on his perch and starving. Then they found the logbook and things got stranger. The last entry was from December 15th, more than a week earlier. On December the 12th, keeper Thomas Marshall noted a violent storm, one so fierce that it terrified all three men. Thomas wrote, "Severe winds the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. On December 13th, he said the storm worsened. James Ducat, the head keeper, was quiet and praying, and William MacArthur, the burly, rough-tempered man, was crying." On December 14th, the last entry read, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." And then, nothing. But when officials investigated, they found something impossible. The storm had supposedly ended on the 14th, which was the last date of their journal entries. But the damage to the western landing area suggested that the storm actually occurred after this date, because if damage had occurred while the men were still present, they would have noted it down in the logbook. They found the metal railings twisted, and it was missing storage crates. It looked like the damage caused by a storm, but more specifically from a massive wave. Now, this western landing area sits at about 33 meters above sea level, which is about 100 feet. So that's a long way up. As they continued to search the island thoroughly, they discovered that at the top of one of the highest cliffs, this is 200 feet above sea level, they found the grass had been ripped up by something. And a boulder weighing a ton had been moved from its original position. But there was no one left to witness it. The official explanation is a freak wave, which would have had to have been close to a tsunami. The idea is that two of the men went out down to the western landing to secure the crane and the goods and different things that they did not want to see washed away. And as you remember, Thomas Marshall was terrified of getting another fine. He did not want more of his equipment being washed away because that was like a week's wages for him. So the theory is that two of them went down to the landing to secure the goods, and the other one, who was still in the lighthouse, saw a massive wave rolling in and ran down there to warn them, and then swept all three of them away. The problem with this theory is that it was forbidden for all three of them to leave the lighthouse at once. There had to be always one person in the lighthouse to make sure that it was functioning. Why did one of them leave without his coat? And why were their last log entries so emotional? These were seasoned men. One of them was a military man. They had seen storms before. And why was there no storm recorded on the mainland when they claimed to have seen one? The storm that hit the mainland wasn't till a few days later. One possibility is that the isolation drove them mad. Perhaps Donald MacArthur had a meltdown. Locals whispered of ancient spirits that haunted the island. So could they have been lured out into the sea by a supernatural force? Some people suggest that the men saw something they weren't supposed to see, like a passing spy vessel or some kind of military operation. And as the saying goes, dead men tell no tales. In the 1890s, mercury started to be used as a sort of fluid ball bearing, which made the light spin in its position a lot easier than traditional ball bearings. And so a lot of lighthouse keepers actually started to go mad due to mercury poisoning. At the time, it wasn't every single lighthouse that used mercury, but as this was a brand new lighthouse and this new technology had been invented about a decade prior, so chances are they were using this new technology. A decade later, the poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson wrote a ballad called Flannan Lighthouse. Though 3 men dwell on Flannan Isle to keep the lamp alight, as we steered under the lee, we caught no glimmer through the night. Aye, though we hunted high and low and hunted everywhere, of the 3 men's fate we found no trace, of any kind in any place, but a door ajar and an untouched meal and an overtoppled chair. Over a century later, the mystery remains unsolved. The keepers of the Flannan Lighthouse vanished into thin air, leaving no trace. So was it the sea or madness or something stranger? We may never know. But the lighthouse still stands, and some say if you listen closely on stormy nights, you can hear voices on the wind. What do you think happened? I'd love to hear your theories. And if you enjoyed this, you can subscribe for more mysteries from history. Join me next time as we take a deep dive, the deepest dive. What happened when a group of 9 hikers decided to camp on the side of Dead Mountain?